Morning, everybody. Lovely to see you all here. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you all get yourselves settled, we're just going to wait a moment to let everybody join. So while they're doing so, please just get your tea ready, settle yourselves in. You can see from our screen here that there's a chat on the right-hand side. Please do introduce yourselves. You can find it if you just toggle through the icons on the right-hand side of your screen, and do pop in where you're calling from today, what business you're from. We love to know who is here and joining us. So do please share that. And once everybody has filled in and joined us today, we'll get started. Just to let you all know, the session today is going to be recorded. We will send a copy to you all after the webinar. So sit back, enjoy yourselves, and we'll kick off today imminently. So those that have just joined, do please share in the chat who you are, where you're from, and we will kick off in just a moment. So I'm going to move us along, and what I'll just share with you today briefly is an agenda of what we're going to cover off. To let you all know, my name is Olivia Hill. I'm Head of Sustainability Communications here at Seismic. I'm very delighted to be your host today. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about communications alongside three other really wonderful panel members that we have today. We're discussing carbon and how to set targets to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and communicate those with your employees. So a really vital topic on the landscape at the moment in ESG, crucial for every aspect of a business. And we hope that you really enjoy today's session. You can see here on the agenda that firstly, we're going to be talking about what net zero is and how to measure your carbon emissions. We'll then move on to, once you've measured them, how you set targets to reduce them, and how you then engage employees on that journey with some examples of how to do that, and how to best communicate it to them. And then after about the first half hour of the hour we have today, we're then going to introduce a fantastic panel of speakers who will join us for a Q&A. And so do please share your questions in the chat as we go through the session. We'll be monitoring them, hopefully picking them up. I suspect we'll get lots, so if we don't get through them all today, we'll do our very best. We'll then answer any pertinent ones that we didn't get to. So pop them in. We will pick them up as we go and hopefully answer as many as we can. So before I dive into our agenda today and introduce our first panel speaker, I'm just going to very briefly talk to you about Seismic. So we are a sustainability advisory, and as a business, we're on a mission to change society and fix our planet. We do this by pinpointing the most credible and commercially viable frameworks out there to bring about environmental and social change for our partners around the world. So we're really excited to have you here today to join us in hopefully achieving that. This is just a brief snapshot of some of the many clients we work with. We're lucky enough to work with clients across all sectors, B2B, B2C, working with businesses who are working to reach their sustainability ambitions. And we've supported nearly 200 businesses at Seismic so far. Our community is very important to us. So events like this that bring everyone together and allow us to hear firsthand from their peers and share your lessons learned is something that we think is absolutely vital, because working together is key to tackling the climate challenges we face. So we're thrilled to have so many of you here with us today. And then finally, the way we work with a lot of our clients is through these many services that we offer, a variety of different services that really help to accelerate sustainability and ESG progress in businesses and help you to achieve your objectives. We work with companies from developing their sustainability strategy through to B Corp certification, and the ever-changing landscape of reporting and disclosure. So today we're talking to you about our net zero services and how to reduce carbon emissions. And we're also talking to you about communications, how we apply a purpose-driven lens to high quality communications, and help you to achieve those carbon and net zero targets. And so moving on now to our topic and agenda for today, what we wanted to start with was a quick poll. And so you should now see this popping up on your screens from our fantastical technical experts behind the scenes, to give us an idea of where you are all at on your carbon journey, so that we can get a feel for the progress that's happening collectively in the room today. So on your poll, we'd love you to answer how confident you are with your progress towards net zero. This is all anonymous. It's just going to give us some percentages. And if you could just click 1 if you've not started, 2 if you've measured your footprint, and 3 if, having measured it, you've now set your targets. And I'm going to hand over to our first panel speaker, who will share those results with you. So I'm delighted to introduce you next to Joe Venables. He is a principal consultant here at Seismic and works across our carbon services, specializing in supporting our clients to set achievable carbon reduction strategies that really have meaningful impact. And he's going to talk to you today about the net zero journey and how to set those targets. So I'll hand over to you, Joe, and I look forward to speaking with you all later.
Amazing. Thanks, Olivia. And yeah, lovely to, well, can't see all of you, but have you all on the call today. And yeah, excited for today's session. So as Olivia said, I'm going to talk to you a bit about carbon. This is very much sort of our bread and butter. And yeah, we're excited to talk this through with you. So yeah, the first thing I want to talk to you about is really just the pathway and the process. So as with a lot of things, there is, you know, really a recommended way of completing your carbon footprint and net zero journey. And, you know, that also helps benefit all of the communications going out. So it's a bit of a step-by-step process. And I'm going to be talking a bit more about some of those steps with you. So starting off is really scope 1 to 3 carbon footprint measurement. So there's an age-old quote of "you can't manage what you can't measure," and this really holds true when it comes to footprinting. So yeah, first step is understanding that impact. The kind of following step we recommend is, right, we have our impact, but now we want to come up with a carbon reduction pathway supported by an action plan. So basically, what levers can we pull across our business to reduce our carbon emissions, you know, in line with a formal target, which nicely segues on to sort of setting a carbon reduction target. So this is really important for businesses to, you know, hold themselves accountable. And it's all well and good having sort of reduction goals, but in our experience, unless there's a sort of quantified hard number target against it, there's a risk of you know, it all being talk and no action. So yeah, after you set your target, there's a case of basically implementing that net zero action plan you've laid out, and, you know, an expectation to kind of keep revisiting it and checking it's fit for purpose, which kind of follows on to the next piece. So yeah, measuring that carbon footprint annually, which is a requirement for any target, and, you know, communicating your progress against the targets. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on these first 3 boxes, and then that will hopefully segue nicely into Olivia talking about the communication side of things. The implementation is obviously crucial, but it's very sort of business and sector specific. So yeah, really starting off with carbon measurement. I'm going to bring up a visual that I'm sure a lot of you have already seen. It's taken from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. But basically what we've got here is an overview of an organization's scope 1 to 3 footprint, where your scope 1 impacts are your direct emission releases. It's you pumping out greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, typically heating, refrigerants, and company vehicles. Scope 2 are indirect emissions associated with electricity, or kind of basically things that are generated off-site but consumed on-site. So it can also cover district heating and the like. The third one, which is always the most challenging to accurately measure and reduce, is scope 3. And that covers kind of everything else within your upstream supply chain and downstream value chain, kind of within your business's control. So, you know, it's important to define that piece of string in terms of your footprint into something that you can actually influence and do something about. So yeah, when it comes to carbon measurement, it's really important to understand which emission sources are relevant and which teams internally can provide data. Then it's all about engaging with them to collect data and information to inform your footprint. Then when it comes to calculation, obviously there's a bit of data request that's required, and queries should be sent out to those sort of data owners because they're closest to the information. And then critically is like, once you're done, this can't just sit in a PDF report or just be hidden behind the scenes. You want to communicate those results to all parties involved and really learn from challenges to embed a robust process for future years. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say on footprint measurement. There's a lot more, and but yeah, this is the kind of key bits to cover really on what needs to be done. Then in terms of your reduction pathway and action plan, so it's all about communication again. So engaging with all levels of your business to set your business's goal and really to discuss the viability of any reduction measures, any of those levers you're pulling to reduce carbon with the people closest to the implementation, because to put it shortly, they know best. Then it's up to implementing those measures and then continually measuring and calculating emissions to understand progress against your targets. Then on to point 4, it's back to communications. So basically, you know, people across your business have gone to all the effort of helping you and providing data. You want to communicate that progress so they understand where they are and, you know, what they can do to improve. And you know, with footprinting, it's always a case of improvement over years. So every year you can identify what can be done in terms of reductions, but also things like data quality as well to ensure your targets are achieved. So yeah, a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but now want to touch on carbon reduction targets. And what I'm going to be talking about here really are just science-based targets. So, you know, the benefit of setting a science-based target is, you know, it's a third externally validated sort of super high quality and robust target, you know, supported by the UN Global Compact, World Wildlife Fund, World Bank, etc. And it kind of treats your country, your business as a country with its own, you know, net zero target in line with the Paris Agreement or similar. So when it comes to science-based targets, you know, there's sort of 3 main types, and I'm going to touch on each of them today. So really starting from lowest to highest ambition, we've got a near-term SME science-based target, a near-term science-based target, so applies to larger companies, and then that long-term net zero science-based target. So yeah, they're a little bit of a mouthful, but I'm going to just talk through each of those and the kind of requirements with you now. So starting off with that near-term SME target. So that is, it only applies to small, medium enterprises. So that's defined as less than 250 employees, less than 50 million euros turnover, and less than 25 million assets. And they're quite simple to understand, these ones, but really it equates to a sort of 42% reduction in scope 1 and 2 by 2030. And there is a requirement to measure and reduce your scope 3, but you do not need to set a quantitative target for them. Moving on to a near-term science-based target. So this applies to organizations of all sizes, and there are a few different reduction options you can go for. So you can have an absolute target, a intensity target, so reduction per unit revenue or physical product, or a supplier engagement target, which is targeting a certain portion of your, well, 2/3 of your suppliers have SBTs as well. The window for this must be between 5 and 15 years, and I've put a range here because it does depend on where you on what target option you go for and your window length, but you're looking at between a 34% and a 67% reduction over that time frame. Finally, onto the long-term net zero science-based target. So this is if you want to be really bold and ambitious and set your business up for a net zero future. Applies to organizations of all sizes, and in short, it entails a 90% reduction in scope 1 to 3 by 2050 or earlier. So yeah, that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and if your business is somewhere along this journey, we'd love to speak with you a bit more about it and how we can support you getting there. But in the meantime, I want to hand back over to Olivia to talk a bit more on the communication with employees side of things. So yeah, thanks, Olivia.
Thank you, Joe. So what I'm going to share with you now is a bit of insight into how you actually communicate with employees and engage them on the journey that Joe has just talked you through. So the first thing I just wanted to share is some initial key ideas to think about when those engagement opportunities might be and with whom across your business. There are 4 key things we tend to recommend to businesses to build into your carbon strategy when you're then communicating it out and to better work towards reaching those targets. The first is building an internal committee that provides really great strategic direction. It helps you to set goals and develop plans and allocate resources. And crucially, in creating an internal committee to work towards your net zero targets, you are facilitating cross-departmental collaboration, which will break down silos and create a coordinated approach, and foster progress, allowing you to track it and crucially give people accountability. So this internal committee part is a really key part of successful governance. It's that G in ESG, setting up the chain of responsibility from board level down the company with a governance structure will ensure you have individuals assigned to actually achieving your carbon action plan. And another part of that internal committee is then creating sustainability champions. So that's the right-hand side point here. Individuals within the business who will really drive awareness of your carbon action plan and your targets and how you're achieving reductions as you go. And those sustainability champions will lead by example and will also be able to share initiatives and drive innovation that they're hearing across the business. And it also, as with the internal committee, ensures that accountability part, so that individuals who are passionate about sustainability will feel accountable for the changes that you're making. We have some lovely examples. You can apply fund names to your sustainability champions and really make them feel empowered. We work with Innocent, and they have beekeepers, they call them, and they are their sustainability champions are driving their B Corp agenda. And another of our clients, Jersey Water, they have change makers across the business who shift in their role of what they are driving change around, depending on the strategic focus at the time. On the bottom left here, we have employee surveys. Now, we all know that lots of businesses do a lot of surveys, but it really is a great way to capture insights. And I think surveys have a dual purpose. They are a comms tool in themselves to communicate important agendas that the business is saying it's important. We understand your views on them. And then it also tracks progress. So you're using a survey as a tool to share your carbon action plan and what you're trying to do. And then you would also survey employee behaviors and their attitudes to sustainability, and then you can monitor that over time, so you can see, as you're tracking progress towards your carbon targets, the changing attitudes that you're having and the altered behaviors over time as you work towards your net zero target. And then finally, we also recommend what we call carbon literacy training, which equips employees with knowledge, and knowledge is power. It will be, you will better empower employees to actually scale the challenge and drive change. It will help in quality data collection if they better understand what net zero means, what carbon means, and it will foster a culture of sustainable practices across your business. So there are a number of points, and I'm going to come to milestones in the journey shortly, that training is really successful. But we also recommend tailoring that training to different departments, so people can really understand what carbon reductions means to their job. The what's in it for me is always crucial in successful communications. So by tailoring your training to your operations department or your finance department or your marketing department, you're really understanding what they individually can do, what carbon means to them, the impact that their role has, and therefore the emissions reductions that they can personally work towards making. So now that I've touched on some of those key initiatives that you can implement, I wanted to talk through the milestone changes in your net zero journey. And for this, it would be helpful for us to just refer back to the poll that you did at the beginning. And then I'll talk through the milestones. If we just publish the results quickly, we can see a really positive mix across everybody in the room here. A quarter of you haven't yet started, so you're at this very early stage in your journey where you might only even be thinking about your net zero ambitions. And then over half of you have actually measured your carbon footprint, which is the end of this first phase. You would have calculated your carbon footprint, and you'd actually be at a point in which you can now announce those results. And that's a second key milestone. So that first one being announcing your net zero ambitions as a business. You're on the journey and you're working towards trying to reduce them. And then for the half of you here who have now calculated your carbon footprint, you can then announce what that footprint is, and that will give you the breakdown of where your emissions are and what they mean to your business. And then for the final quarter of you who have set targets and work towards them, that would be the next stage. And we tend to say communications wise, there are 4 milestones. So once you have developed your net zero pathway, and as Joe talked about, worked to set an action plan, you can then set your targets. So by having an action plan to reduce those emissions, that's a key milestone announcement. And then finally, you set your targets and submit those targets to the Science Based Targets Initiative, and you can then share your externally validated targets. And at that point, I would say the comms shifts from being not just an internal comms opportunity engaging employees in this program of work, but you would also want to externally communicate the fact that you have a verified set of targets that you're working towards, because you can now fully share your full net zero plan of your carbon emissions and then your targets to reduce them. So finally, before we introduce our panel, I just wanted to share some comms examples with you. So I've got 3 examples to share, and I always think showing, not just telling, how best to communicate is a really great way to hopefully inspire you to think about what to talk about and how. So the first example we have is here from Clinigen. Clinigen are a global specialist pharmaceutical company. Their mission is to accelerate access to medicines for patients globally. And they have 4 pillars in their ESG strategy, one of which is decarbonising healthcare. So they are well on their way to developing a pathway to net zero, which includes targets submitted to the SBTi. This aligns with their investor Triton's own targets, which they are hopefully securing approval from the SBTi soon. You can see here from the infographics we've developed with them that they have talked about their net zero pathway from the perspective of the priority areas for their emissions, which relates it back to the business and what emissions are relevant to them. And for Clinigen, it's transport, it's buildings, and it's waste. And then on the right, you can see that we've broken down their near-term targets and their long-term targets in their commitments for full transparency. And what we also share related to these numbers, and this just shows graphically how you can work on the percentages, we then talk about where they are at in terms of reaching those percentages. If they're behind target, we are open and transparent about it, and that's really vital when you're talking about sustainability. So it's a real kudos to Clinigen that they are prepared to talk about where they're struggling and where their challenges are, as well as their successes. And then the next example is from Team Blue. I'm going to be introducing you to Vanessa from Team Blue shortly. They're a digital enabler for companies and entrepreneurs. There are lots of brands coming together to serve over 2 million customers across Europe with anything related to online business, from web hosting to compliance to payment and billing. And in the example that you can see here, we work with them to create this really nice infographic on the bottom left, which plots where they're at on their net zero journey. That you can see the orange dots filling up as to the stage that they're at, and that's a really honest reflection. And we use this in their annual report to show annually the stage that they are at. That they've submitted their targets for approval, and this reflects the SBTi's own comms guidance for you to show later down the line the stages that you're at once your footprint has been calculated. And then on the right, you can see here examples where we've highlighted how some of the examples of ways in which they've reduced their emissions. This is what I love to call, say, sustainability storytelling, actually bringing to life the specific examples of the ways in which Team Blue are reducing emissions. And by sharing those stories, you really bring what can often be the drier numbers to life. And then finally, our last example is from Monica Vinader. They're a luxury jewelry brand and are very committed to sustainable practices and influencing the jewelry industry at large. This is a good example of that early stage part of your journey when you've measured your carbon footprint and you're wanting to explain why what this carbon footprint means to you and your business. On the left, you can see here their scope 1 and 2 emissions. So the graph shows where they're at now and what they're committed to. And then some specific examples in that 100% commitment that shows the areas that their scope 1 and 2 covers as a business. And on the right, they've actually broken down their emissions by source of their scope 3, and their scope 3 are 99.7% of their emissions fall into scope 3, and that's not unusual. A lot of businesses, the majority of their emissions are their scope 3 emissions, and by breaking it down, it immediately relates to them as a jewelry producer and their industry, that gemstones and diamonds are this key part of their emissions factors that they need to tackle. And it allows them to talk really transparently about what their plans are to address the standardization of gemstone emissions factors, and working with the industry and governing bodies to better understand and reduce those emissions. So I'm going to finish us up there. You can just briefly see on this slide what success looks like if you have successfully engaged with your employees in order to communicate your emissions and therefore drive them down. It helps with business success, it achieves quick wins, and it upskills with knowledge. And so I would like now to move on to a discussion with our panel, so we can actually speak to some of the experts in some of these examples I've shared with you, to share some of their own experiences. So I'm delighted to introduce Tanya Young, who is an ESG project manager. She's currently working with one of our wonderful clients, Freshwave, and Vanessa, who I briefly talked about from Team Blue earlier, who is the Group Sustainability and Legal Director there at Team Blue. So Tanya and Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us. And we're also going to have Joe back on the screen with us. So ask you some questions. And for those in the audience, I'm going to be asking some questions of Tanya and Vanessa now. Please do put your questions in the chat. Hopefully, I will be able to pick up on them and cover them, and we'll get some time at the end to specifically address those direct questions. But firstly, I would just like to ask Tanya and Vanessa to introduce yourselves. And when you do introduce yourselves, would you have a brief overview of where you are at on your carbon journey? Tanya, why don't we come to you first?
Good morning. Thank you, Olivia, and lovely to be on the call with everyone this morning. By way of introduction, got a lot of background noise. Is that probably me? I'm not sure. I was very lucky to have had nearly 10 years leading and delivering ESG and social value programs at EE and BT. So I'm now using that experience to help smaller organisations get started on their ESG journeys. They tend to be at the early stages of their plans, so I might be helping them establish their ambitions, which Joe's just spoken about, or maybe completing an energy audit or engaging with business stakeholders to sort of spot energy saving opportunities that they can build into their daily operations.
Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Olivia, and so happy to be present here today and be part of the panel. So you already introduced Team Blue, and as it is for me, I'm the Group Legal and Sustainability Director of Team Blue. Started working on sustainability, I would say, 2 years ago, and that's exactly also the time period when we started to calculate our carbon footprint. So I think 2 years ago, we did the full scope 1, 2, and 3. And when we got that first data, and in all honesty, it was not the best data because we just started, and it's okay just to start somewhere. You can improve along the way. But when we calculated our carbon footprint for the first time, comparing it a little bit to our peers, we were like, we are not doing that bad. So I thought we have a very good story to go to our board and asking them their approval to actually go beyond measuring and to set our carbon reduction targets to be a very environmental conscious company. So 2 years ago, I got the go from the board, and we calculated again, and then engaged with Joe and Asia from from Seismic to see, okay, with this data, how can we actually build our story, our pathway to reduce our emissions going forward. You already saw the infographic telling a little bit where we are in that journey, but we are already now at the next step where we submitted our science-based targets. So hopefully by the end of the year, we got a validation on that.
Thanks, Vanessa. Exciting times. Definitely a moment for a good announcement. So what I'm going to do is come to both of you first, just to share your thoughts on what you feel the most crucial factors are to consider when setting ambitious but also achievable targets for your company. Tanya, why don't we come to you first with some advice?
Sure. I think it was interesting. The poll said that 25% of participants that have joined this morning's session are at the beginning of their journey. So my most basic advice is to start small and be realistic. You may even need to introduce the concept of scopes and emissions, sort of using very clear, easy to understand language, and often examples can help do that. But having a clear baseline and some targets definitely helps. So the first thing really is to start collating whatever data you can find and whatever's available relevant to your ambitions that you're setting, so that you can begin to measure your footprint and track progress. The first year round, you really probably won't have all the data you need. So finance, procurement, operation and HR are normally really good places to start on your stakeholder engagement skills.
Thanks, Tanya. I think that's very helpful and realistic advice. Over to you, Vanessa.
When we started with the journey, I think for myself as well and for the team members working on this closely, it was important to understand our value chain and not overcomplicate things, but really understand like who is the supplier, with what kind of contractors do we work, what do we add to our product and service to eventually then provide it to our customers. So it's a very simple way of depicting it. And then understanding who your top 10 suppliers are from a cost perspective, because most likely those top 10 suppliers will contribute the most to your emissions. So then you already have a little bit of a view, like what are like the key contributors that I want to work on in order also to set reduction targets. A plus point on that as well is that if you look at the top 10 suppliers, probably you're working with large enterprises that might already have reduction targets. First of all, it gives you a little bit of comfort, like, okay, they have reduction targets, so we are working with the right supplier. That's one thing. But secondly, whatever they do to reduce their emissions has a positive impact on yourself as well. So that obviously also pins down to your own targets going forward.
Really helpful. And also, like, trying to sometimes tackle the whole thing is overwhelming. So by like choosing that focus where it's that biggest impact first is like the ideal place to start. So how do you ensure that your targets are aligned with your overall business strategy to make sure it works for the business as a whole? And Vanessa, why don't I stick with you, and then Tanya will come to you.
Well, once you know your biggest contributors, you have to look at the business plan. If there are any projects coming up on which you can have an impact. I'm going to give you an example. So we work in the hosting space, so we have quite some data centers. And at a certain point, I saw on the agenda that we were looking for a new data center in Turkey. You want to be at that table to make sure that sustainability is a criteria in the choice of supplier. It might not be the only criterion. Obviously, price and quality comes first, but if you have two suppliers to choose from and you can choose the most sustainable one, then actually that has also a positive impact on your carbon footprint and on your targets. Another way is looking from a supplier's perspective, maybe with your procurement department, if there are any consolidation plans going forward. Let's say you have 5 suppliers supplying the same and you want to consolidate to come to 2 or 3. Again, make sure that you're around the table, and then your business strategy matches also your ESG strategy or sustainability strategy.
Really helpful. Tanya, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, very similar sort of theme. The key thing, again, starting from scratch, is to get to know and engage with teams and individuals across the business that you think can help influence and deliver change as part of their business as usual. And that's absolutely key. For me, a good example would be working perhaps with the HR team. If they have an annual review of their policies, you can explore opportunities to add in some sustainable travel guidance, or perhaps speak to your lease hire company to make sure that hybrid or electric vehicles are offered as an option when companies are hiring vehicles. Again, another simple thing is whoever's responsible for paying your gas and electricity bills, or if you have sort of big office and building sites, engage with your office manager or procurement leads and encourage landlords to purchase renewable energy. And again, that's another sort of just easy thing to get you started.
Great, thank you. Really helpful tips. So how about we move now to that employee engagement side? And I wonder if you could each give us an example of perhaps how you've engaged employees in your journey so far to achieve those carbon reduction targets. Vanessa, how about we start with you?
I'm going to maybe give the example of the specific department that I needed to get on my journey to make things work. Because when Joe touched upon scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, I mean, there are two ways to get your data. It's on an activity base or it's on a spend base. Now, when you start calculating your carbon footprint, probably it will be more on a spend base, meaning you will need to have access to invoices to understand what is the spend for a certain supplier, contractor, etc., or electricity. And then there are some very sophisticated calculations or formulas behind it and to calculate your carbon footprint. So if you know that, that also means that you need to get your finance department on board to get high quality data. We did this last year because obviously they're also impacted by the regulatory framework. CSRD is coming at us, so we need to make sure that also from that perspective we have good data. But by engaging the whole finance team in every region, in every country where we already optimized our data so much that we reduced our carbon footprint just by having better quality data. And the good thing about this is, as well, is that they're incentivized to look to improve your data, to process the data in a better way, maybe automate it so that your yearly calculations come much smoother the next time that you calculate your carbon footprints.
Great example, thank you. Tanya, one from you?
I was going to say that finance are definitely key. But from my perspective, having worked in the mobile industry for a long time, there are a lot of mobile phones lying around. And with, I think it's 80% of carbon emissions occur during the manufacturing of devices, it sort of made sense to focus on e-waste initiatives. And I think you can do to recycle, refurbish and reuse equipment, again, makes a huge difference in terms of the carbon reduction initiative. And that involved working across the business, but particularly with procurement, marketing and the customer services team. But I think you can do that within smaller companies and on a smaller scale as well. So I'm working with a particular company that offer a buyback scheme for refurbished laptops in exchange for a small donation to the company charity. And then again, that's something to sort of celebrate and tell a story about.
Great example.
Could I just add one thing, Olivia? Like, yeah, there's definitely all levels of the business that need to be engaged with in some form. But you know what we find time and again is there are people within all of your business, everyone in the audience. There's people in there who are passionate about making this happen, and you know they're perfect people to help bring you along this journey. And we found that really works. So yeah, you don't have to be a sustainability professional to achieve change. Sometimes it's best coming from those people who it's just part of their day job.
Okay.
Great. What both of you do you feel are some of the biggest challenges that you think you come across when trying to engage across your organisation? How about you? We come to you, Tanya, first.
Time and time again, I've found a common pitfall is to agree targets without involving those who will be responsible for delivering them. Nobody really likes ESG being done to them, but as Joe's just mentioned, there are a lot of people across all businesses that are very passionate and want to get involved, but nobody really likes sort of having a load of projects landed on top of them to help you agree predetermined targets. So I think if you don't have a agreed governance approach, you're going to struggle to report on, track and make progress for any plan. So in my experience, the bare minimum would be to have an exec sponsor or someone at a leadership level, someone who can own the targets, and then someone who can help deliver them. And that might be an individual or that might be a team of people, but I think you just need to be cognizant and realistic of people's time and resource. Again, start small, celebrate the milestones and just keep going. And each year you can just sort of push those boundaries and those initiatives a little bit more once you've got people on board.
I think that's excellent advice, Tanya. Having people right from the outset that you have agreed those targets with, it's that accountability factor that then means they feel they've contributed and so will continue to support it. I think it's vital. Vanessa, over to you. Any common pitfalls or challenges you've come across?
Starting maybe with my personal challenge in the beginning is talking that language. It's not easy. I mean, you almost feel like you need to be a scientist to understand science-based targets. So you need to bring also the right language to your employees so that they buy into this. So kind of simplify it in a way, but so they really understand what you're talking about and not something that is not necessarily something within their comfort zone. And obviously, I mean, there is a collective thing, of course, within your company if you want to strive towards reduction targets, but you also need to look a little bit on the what is in it for me angle. I think that also comes down to the championship, as Joe mentioned, and Tanya as well. People need to feel proud for the kind of activity or contributions that they can do themselves. So if you report on achievements made, I think it's very key that you also name persons, departments that contributed to that achievement, to that success, because then you have not only the collective proudness of the company, but also the individual proudness of people saying, I actually did this.
It's very true. Well done. I'm going to make sure we have a bit of time for questions from the floor as well. I do have more questions for you all, but I'll keep hopefully one to the end to finish us off. Thank you so much. I think your insight is very helpful, and we're seeing some questions coming through. The first is actually a question probably for you, Joe, which was a question about software options for carbon measurement. Is there any that you would recommend? Think about where people should start.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. And in my experience, you can pay anything from £1,000 to £100,000 a year just for a software solution. In our experience, just having a piece of software alone isn't quite enough. Like, you kind of need to have that sort of knowledge and coaching to basically make sure you put the right numbers in short. As part of Seismic services, when we do carbon footprinting, we've partnered with an organization called Compare Your Footprint, which kind of strikes the right balance between features and price. So when we footprint for people, it's not just, hey, here's the platform, fill in some numbers. It's we support with that process and write up a methodology. But yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Hope that was helpful. I have a question here about setting the targets from Jane Blacklock. We'll jump to that because she's asked how have you actually calculated a realistic reduction? I think specifically looking at scope 3, which is often the biggest emission factors. Do you have any thoughts on how you actually got to the point of setting those targets for scope 3? Perhaps from either Vanessa or Tanya, and Joe, you can share some thoughts.
Sure, happy to share how we did it. So again, starting with your biggest contributors, because then you know where you can have the biggest impact on your reductions. And to be very open in our case, obviously IT equipment suppliers, that's our biggest contributor. Also professional service suppliers, because we do a lot of M&A. So we actually saw that they contributed a big chunk in our carbon footprint. Now, when we had a discussion with Joe and Asia about this, it's not necessarily about do we have a good supplier or need to change it, because that's a drastic decision and obviously needs to be in the business plan. But already know who you have as a supplier and see how they can contribute more. So specifically on the IT equipment, so we purchase a lot of PCs that go into our data centers. We saw that our supplier, our main supplier, has science-based targets. So the action there was just to make sure that we stick to that supplier with science-based targets. And if we still have some PCs within our company that not necessarily come from that supplier, or not a supplier that doesn't have reduction targets, maybe you can actually make that shift to 100% having your PCs from a supplier that have these targets. So it's not always about drastic changes, renegotiating contracts or whatsoever. It's also looking for the quick wins. And in our case, there were actually a lot of quick wins that do not require capital investments or whatsoever to actually make those targets come to life and to commit to them.
Yeah, I'd agree with Vanessa 100%. Finding an owner, get some realistic targets, build up. And you don't need to be an expert. You know, I obviously work with Seismic as well. So look for benchmarks in that particular area, or use their expertise to actually say, this is a good chunk for this year, that year, and then work on your reduction plan. But get the agreement from the people that own the data in the business.
And just to add, like, the science-based target initiative provides a lot of guidance, potentially too much, but you know, all the information's there, and they do have publicly available tools where you put in your footprint data, you know, scope 1, 2 and 3, you select your target end date, and that's what your target looks like. So that's quite a good exercise to do at the start of things, is like, right, where we are and where do we need to get to.
Brilliant. I am going to take us to a last question, which is actually going to round us off, because I do want to make sure we don't go over our time. But I was going to ask Tanya and Vanessa, if you just had one piece of advice to give to sustainability leaders who are just starting on their journey, of how to go about setting reduction targets and engaging employees, what would your piece of advice be? Tanya, why don't we come to you first?
I think my advice is, if you're passionate about ESG and your sustainability targets, lead by example, pardon the pun, but be down to earth. Communicate your purpose with purpose and the benefits of your sort of sustainability initiatives, and make sure you involve employees early.
Good advice. Thank you. How about to you, Vanessa?
Great advice indeed. I can definitely second that. And adding maybe to that on the communication part, I think it's really important that you kind of demystify and simplify anything that has to do with carbon footprint and reduction targets towards your employees. Because if you're working on this on a weekly, monthly basis, you understand this, but somebody that hears it maybe 4 times a year, you need to bring the message over and over again. And what I do in order to simplify also the language and etc. is use infographics. Joe used that one infographic in the beginning of the slide deck. This is actually my reporting framework. So I just put very big circles around those contributors that are the biggest contributors. And then I put just percentages saying, oh, we already lowered our emissions with this percentage by just changing supplier or changing the way we work, and etc. And just constantly use that same framework, because then people start to recognize it, and they really there's a higher buy-in, definitely, if they understand the language better, if they understand also what the impact is on our organization.
Brilliant. I think excellent piece of advice. Joe, do you have anything, a top tip that you would share for our audience?
I mean, communication's key, but I think, you know, when it comes to information or data request, is to make it as simple as possible. I use the term paint by numbers a lot. So, you know, particularly if you're asking something of someone and it's not their day job, you don't want them to have to go and interpret, you know, this and read the guidance. They just want all the key bits of what needs to be done, and then, you know, provide that. And then, you know, that it's always best to sort of present back what they've given in a sort of user-friendly and appropriate way. So yeah, but really liked all of those suggestions. I'm noting it all down. You know.
I agree with all. And my bit of advice is the what's in it for me factor. I think if you can always relate it back to how it will influence your job, empower you to do it better, how the results of what you are doing affect you individually or your role within the business, you're much more likely to get people's engagement. So think about the different departments and roles and areas of the business that affects, and tailor that communications to them. So we had a couple more questions, but I hope we actually did manage to cover off the majority of them. And always, I feel we never have enough time, and are so appreciative of the fantastic panel members who give up their time to come and share their insights. So Vanessa and Tanya, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always such a pleasure to hear from our community and to hear specifically the examples of what you're doing, how you're making it work, which really does, I think, simplify what can often feel like a complex topic and a terrifying thing to tackle into something that people will hopefully realise we all need to do this. We're all working together to try to improve the climate challenges we face, and there are ways to do it, and it can be approached if you take it step by step. So thank you for sharing your insights today. It's been hugely helpful, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. I do very much hope that you've found this a really valuable and insightful session. If you want to share any further questions with us, do please, and we will endeavour to get back to you. And do sign up on Eventbrite for our next session. Next time in our breakfast briefings, we're going to be talking about accelerating your business impact by looking at the B Corp standards. We're looking at the next set of standards and how you become a B Corp within the current standards that exist. So do please join us for that next session. And I'll leave it there for today as we hit that 10 o'clock mark. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of the day, and we will be sharing this recording after. So enjoy yourselves and look forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye.
Thanks very much.